Kristen Ciccolini.
And I'm Janine Malone.
And you're listening to It's Just a Phase. Each week, we'll bring you inspiring and informative conversations about honoring the different cycles of life, covering topics of health and wellness, moon phases, astrology, witchcraft, feminism, and more, so you can superpower your well-being and live your best life. Hey, Janine.
Hi, Kristen.
How you doing?
Oh, good. How are you?
Good. Episode 2.
Oh my God. I think 2 makes it real.
Totally. I think it's real. Hashtag it's real.
Hashtag it's real. This is for everyone listening, this is our ongoing theme of like every step of this process. Kristen and I have like screamed it's real at some point. So yeah, just use it's real as the hashtag. So excited to be talking to you today.
Yeah, what are we going to be talking about?
Oh, only one of our favorite topics in the whole world. How paying attention to cycles can connect you with your intuition. And bonus points, it also connects you to the earth. This is like truly, I could go on and on forever. So I hope that we can I can keep my rambling to a minimum, but I'm super excited to talk to you about intuition.
Yes, definitely one of my favorite topics too. And I love the connection of how we're going to talk about intuition in the earth, spirit, material, how it's all connected. And this is definitely something we could talk about all day as we split this into several different episodes.
Yes, exactly. When we started like mapping this episode out, we basically were like, okay, this is going to be a small audiobook if we don't bring the scissors. So we're really going to talk about, what intuition actually is, its relationship to cycles, obviously, and balance, and then each of our own kind of stories and how we use intuition both in our life and our businesses, which is again just like could go on and on, but we'll keep it actionable because we know that's what the people want.
Yeah, and it's more sort of like a 101 kind of episode just to get started. So yeah, we'll start with what intuition actually is. So I think everyone probably has a little bit of a different definition, but the way I see it is it's a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. So I see it as, it's based on information from our environment because our brains take in so much information every day, like literally billions of information, billion bits of information. Just think about, the things that are in your peripheral vision, like, they're there, but you're not thinking about it. Or maybe the map of your neighborhood. You know where everything is, but you're not thinking about it. You just kind of know. But, if we consciously processed all of that information, like the colors in front of you, what's all around you, our heads would explode. So it's too much. So we take these things in subconsciously and your brain retains all of that. It's like, kind of like a library of experiences, sort of. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that gut feeling that you get when you have an intuitive ping, if that's how it appears to you, um, is your brain making a connection. So recognizing patterns based on that library there of your memories and information and all that. And I think that's kind of like the sciencey way to look at it, but there are definitely more spiritual aspects of connecting to your highest self. But I really look at it as energetic communication with that higher self. And that more intelligent self that has access to that library. Does that make sense, Janine?
Yeah, totally. Like a Library of Congress of your own brain.
Yeah.
All the records. Yeah, I mean, I really like that way of thinking about it as well. I think that that's really helpful because it quiets the part of my brain that's still a bit of a skeptic, even though this is something I obviously believe in and work with all the time. There's a lot of conditioning that we undergo generally that helps or that kind of blocks our ability always to like trust that knowing and trust that we like are processing information in a way that makes sense. I was curious in researching and thinking about this episode to just look up how the dictionary defines intuition. I'm kind of a nerd like that, and it's defined as the ability to understand something immediately without the need for conscious reasoning.
Mhm.
And while I don't think that that's a totally complete definition, I think there's something to that that actually feels really connected to the things that we wanted to talk about today, which is kind of um that need for conscious reasoning. Like that alone is something that sort of creates a divide between maybe what we would consider intellectual and what we would consider intuitive. So because we can't always follow the thread between like what we are actively processing or why we understand or know something to be true, and we can't really talk through all the time like how we know it. There's a lot of there's a lot of ways our society tells us not to trust that, right? So at the surface, there isn't always that thread, and we're really learning. To me, what it all comes down to is like learning about and connecting with your intuition is really about building self trust. So I think that it's pretty easy to see how this kind of naturally demands space, which to me is very much associated with cycles, because we are allowing ourselves to kind of take a step back, have some room and some time for the processing and the connecting and the aha moments. I think if we're just waiting, if we're following always the most like intellectual and conscious reasoning, um, there's not really a lot of time built in for reflection, right? So
I think
yeah,
this kind of relates back to what we were discussing last week about needing those tangible results. And, we love to see that kind of stuff, but it's not necessarily anything that you can see. So, and, we were talking about in the last episode was allowing yourself that time to rest. So, giving yourself that space and, letting things just happen. And what you also just said, like it's without the need for conscious reasoning. Intuition's faster than rational thought, and I think part of it is like because it's pulling from all of that information in your head, you can't consciously process it. It's just there. It's just a knowing,
right.
um, and yeah, just giving yourself that space is really important.
Yeah, totally. And I really like to look at kind of, like I said, those sort of definitions of words like intuition or like conjuring or things like that, that when you look at how we define them very literally, it's often this like, there's like this invisibility to it where like you can't always track or explain exactly like you were saying. We have this huge amount of information in our brain. We couldn't possibly articulate all of it. So sometimes just those like quick connections and those flashes of brilliance are just what they are. And we have to learn how to really believe ourselves, believe in ourselves, which sounds kind of like corny, but I really think that's to me the most important part of working with your intuition, working with cycles, is like trusting that there will be like the next phase and there will be the next brilliant, idea or aha moment, and kind of when you least expect it. You can't really plan, can't always plan for it.
And it's really hard in our society to have that trust in yourself
Yeah,
because like I said, everything we have to have evidence for everything.
correct.
There's a real focus on that in our society, and sometimes there just isn't evidence for how we feel. It's just what came through because we spent some time with ourselves, and that's what came through, and we have to trust that. Um,
Totally.
so yeah, trust is a huge thing, can be kind of a block for some people, especially if you're new to this work. But we'll have some tips for you later on in the episode. But so in terms of creating that space, do you want to talk a little bit about balance and how to make that sort of sustainable?
Oh, yes. I really I have a really interesting relationship with the word balance. I'm sure you do too, Kristen. Like any modern woman, I think there's like a search for balance, and also just like the idea that balance is, this unreachable goal. I like to say that balance is a long game, and it sort of takes constant maintenance and constant checking in, because it's not something where you're ever really plateauing at. And the same thing with your intuition. It's kind of like you need to keep that relationship up like any other relationship in your life. if you're not checking in and not talking to it, like the relationship isn't going to be that healthy. So, I think that in terms of, this balancing act between listening to ourselves, acting on our intuition, checking in with what we know, it is all this it's kind of like a wheel, in terms of where we feel out of sync it's really important to just be checking in. And this is how, to me, and I'm sure to you as well, like self-care is huge in terms of maintaining that relationship with your intuition and also maintaining balance, whatever that means for you.
Yeah, definitely taking that time for yourself in whatever way looks good or feels good to you. It's it's hard to tell you what balance looks like because it's so different for everybody,
Hmm.
especially the way the wellness industry makes balance seem,
Ooh, yes.
which is like a whole other episode.
Literally, I just had like this vision of, that scene in Mean Girls where they're like, raise your hand if you've been personally victimized. I'm like, raise your hand if you've been personally victimized by the word balance in the
Yes.
wellness
Oh my
industry.
God. I even in my notes for this, I have the word, or I have it written down. I hate the word balance. Because
I
it's such an
know.
overused word. It's like it's a cliche at this point, and it's this really weird, like nebulous concept that we're all supposed to have this total hold of, right?
Right.
And
Totally.
yeah, and like according to mainstream wellness, it's like buying organic 99% of the time instead of 100, and making sure you get workouts in only 6 days of the week but doing active rest on Sundays. There's
Yeah.
really no balance at all or any semblance of like a normal person's lifestyle in the way that the wellness industry depicts it.
Yeah, and I think that like to that point there's this idea that, in talking about cycles, like there's this idea that we can create some schedule for ourselves that will like give us balance every single day. Like I certainly have never found that to be true. I mean, who knows? Maybe I'm just like months away from this aha moment of clarity, but I really think that, in thinking about what is a balanced life, and what is balanced for you as an individual, it's really important to remember that like balance doesn't always look balanced. It means that there's gonna be times where you're like, super conscious about one area of your life or something in some relationship is a priority or some activity is a priority. And then there will be like the flip side of that where like that's in maintenance mode and now your attention is focused somewhere else. It's kind of this constant um recalibration, versus something that's like, oh, okay, well, to be balanced means there's like an 80-20 rule. And it means that, like, whatever, I'm balancing something. I'm sure you hear this a lot with your work, Kristen. Like, I ate something bad and now I need to balance it out with exercise, or like,
Oh my
that's
God,
just,
yes. Everyone has to earn their food or work it off, and it's such an interesting way to think about these things, and it's more
yeah,
harmful than anything, and, yeah,
yeah.
it's this weird thought about balance that you have to, like, punish yourself.
Totally. And to me, like, balance is actually most useful when you think about like things weaving together and like being in service to one another rather than being in opposition. Like, if you think about scales, like they can be balanced, but those two things on the opposite ends of the scales are like, you know, kind of, I don't want to say battling each other, but like they kind of are, right? And
Yeah.
really, if you think about, using your intuition and living cyclically, like there's this natural integration that's happening where like you don't actually need to be thinking, well, I did this, so now I need to do the opposite in order to be balanced. That just means you're thinking in the binary, you're thinking in this like, if you take black and white and mix it together, it's just like a gray mess. Whereas like integration and creating spaces that feel holistic and cyclical, to me, raise more like vibrancy, rather than kind of being at odds with your future and past self. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that a lot of people, in the quest for balance, and they try to incorporate self care, but it ends up feeling more just like a chore.
Like more
or
work,
yeah,
totally.
exactly. So, I mean, balance for me, I think means incorporating self-care, when it's practical and when it's possible. Because some days there just isn't time to fit everything in with all of the things that you need to do. And, ideally you'd plan accordingly to not have that happen. But, it's life, it happens. And I'm not going to wake up at 4 in the morning just to get a workout in. Those
Right.
articles that are like, this woman has it all. Here's how she manages it. And then you read it and it's like, she wakes up at 4. And it's like, I don't think so.
Yeah,
uh,
like that's just a no for me, dog. Like,
yeah, absolutely not. So I really, when I say what's possible, I mean, thinking critically about that, that to me means prioritizing it, but not stretching myself thin to the point where self care is actually feeling more like an obligation and like the opposite of self care. Like not being super hard on myself because I didn't fit a workout in, or I skipped a moon ritual like 5 full moons in a row.
totally.
Just having a little bit more compassion for yourself. And I think, I mean, like we're talking about using your intuition, checking in with yourself every day. Like, how do I feel? What kind of self care do I need right now?
Absolutely. I feel kind of the same way. Like I think that balance to me like means giving myself permission to just like take what I need, rather
Mhm.
than being like in I think that in some ways the strive for balance right now is like very comes from like this idea of like scarcity of like, okay, well, I'm never going to have time to rest, but I'm also never going to have time to do all this work. So like I need to kind of try to do both, which obviously just like you said, it's like self-care shouldn't feel like homework. And so yeah, I think to me it's just about reminding myself, kind of like we talked about in episode 1, that like balance is something that occurs naturally, like literally in nature and all the seasons that we talked about. And so when we're following that kind of natural blueprint that's already, beautifully designed for us, there are moments of action, there are moments of rest, there are times where we're really intuitive and really internal, and then there are times when we're, turning those brilliant moments and those that like knowing into action. And so if we can just give ourselves permission to be where we're at, it's like, here's that word trust again. It's like knowing that there will be a moment, like once we are fully recuperated, that we'll be ready for our next project or our next idea or our next 5 mile run. But like before that, we need to take a step back. And like that is just all about tuning in, and intuition just feels so inseparable from that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important. An important aspect of your self care is just developing your intuition, and so you're able to like I said, I look at intuition as a conversation with yourself or
Totally.
communication with yourself. So deciding on your self-care from there versus what you think it's supposed to look like, whether if you don't like taking baths, or maybe you don't want to use all these like crazy expensive superfood powders, or it just doesn't look the way that you think it's supposed to look. Like, if you release yourself of those kinds of expectations, it can just flow a little bit more easily. And you check in with yourself and you let what you think decide what you're going to do, because
Yeah.
a lot of our decisions are just based on other people's expectations and things that we've, like, all these beliefs that we've sort of absorbed, and we don't really think about where those have come from. We just kind of go on autopilot.
Yeah.
So I would invite you all to think about the next time you do something that you would categorize as self-care, thinking about whether it's something that you actually want to do, that's something that feels good to you, or if you feel like you're doing it out of obligation. And we've talked about this before. It can look so different. Maybe your self-care is like knitting, whereas for me that would be like so frustrating because I can never get it right.
Right. Totally. Yeah, no, I think that I mean, I actually think that that kind of leads to this question that maybe is in everyone's mind, and kind of we can talk about some misconceptions about intuition, but like I think it's pretty hopefully clear by that conversation, but like I think everyone is intuitive, right? Like I think there's this misconception that like only some people and like witches and people have access to this information, but it really is about making the space to tune in, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think I've heard before, I've read it before. People think that you have to be gifted in a certain way to to have that connection to your intuition. Um, and I mean, we're all gifted, but you don't have to have like any special, like supernatural kind of gifts. It's a completely natural part of being human. We're all born with intuition, and we're all born knowing how to listen to our bodies. Something I talk about, like in terms of intuitive eating, babies are a great example. Like they just follow whatever they need. Like
Yeah.
when they're eating, they cry when they want it, they get it, and then they take like an hour to eat a banana, and then and then they stop even if there's like 2 bites left. They just know when they're done and they follow their intuition.
Yeah.
So that's always a good example to follow, but in terms of, it being some sort of exclusive thing, it's not. It's more exclusive to people who are working on it, but everyone has it. It's just sort of like buried if you're not
Yeah.
using it.
It's a muscle, right? It's like we all have the same muscles, just some of us have, some of us spend time like working on certain ones and they're stronger. And I think that the thing that I come up against the most, especially in thinking about business, is that people are just really, I think, hesitant to use the word intuitive, because I do think it's been kind of like confused with this idea of like being a psychic or knowing some, being
Mm,
like having premonitions, where like what we mean by intuitive is like having gut feelings, having instincts, like when you just know what you're supposed to do next. And to your point, like when is enough, checking in. So I always like to say to people, like, I don't know, think about a time that you knew something and you weren't totally sure how you knew it. Like you thought of someone earlier that day and then they like called you, or like you had like a weird feeling that something was going to happen at work and there was like a meeting that went like haywire or something. Just kind of that like inkling that you can't totally rationalize, but you also can't shake. Or I use this as clients a lot. I'm like, better yet, because I mean, hi, we all learn so much better from like the hard way, unfortunately. But like, can you think of a time where you felt something and you had an instinct or you had a gut feeling and you kind of went against it because you didn't trust it and then it turned out to be totally right? I could write an encyclopedia of examples of times that I have done that. I don't know about you,
same.
but
Totally.
yeah. So I just think that like everyone has this ability. It's part of human nature actually to be able to like pick up on our environments and information we've like learned in the past, whether we're conscious of it or not, and be able to make these brilliant connections. So if you're someone sitting there thinking like, oh, well, that sounds good, I wish I could do intuitive self-care, like you definitely can. And I'm so excited for you to like get to try. I think that makes me I think that makes me really sad when I hear people say that, like that they're not intuitive or they don't, relate to that, because it's such a gift.
Yeah, and so what you said about having that feeling that you can't shake, sometimes that can feel like anxiety, or
Totally.
it can, you're not sure whether that's like a message coming through or whether it's just like you're in a spiral. So, do you
100%.
have any do you have any ideas of like how someone could differentiate that if they're not used to figuring that out?
Yeah, totally. I famously, you'll get a kick out of this, had a therapist tell me that my intuition started communicating with me through my anxiety because I never listened to it any other way. And I was like, wow,
It
burned.
will
Like,
find a way.
yeah, like totally burned by my therapist. Shout out. But yeah, I think that like the biggest difference to me is, and this is where it all comes into play with like the elements and like our bodies and our intuition, is that, you know, when we're processing information and it's just something that are our thoughts, so like intuition and anxiety, we'll get into like the different kinds of into ways intuition can speak to us. But if you think about just like having thoughts, that's where anxiety and intuition can live for all of us. And so it's actually really important to pay attention to your physical body and where you're feeling certain emotion. So like for me, um anxiety makes me feel like very tense. It like it contracts us, so I can feel kind of my shoulders tighten, I can feel my breaths get more shallow. I can, maybe my like stomach's upset or I'm just feeling like generally nervous. That to me signifies that I'm in anxiety, whereas my intuition, even if it's suggesting to me something that maybe I should be wary of, or that is an opportunity or an idea that makes me scared because it will make me vulnerable or put me out there in a way that I'm not used to. I think that intuition generally feels more expansive. Like our body doesn't tense up in the same way, and I've never found it. I mean, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I've never found intuition to like upset my stomach like anxiety does. So I also think it's just really important to kind of focus on the moments where you have those ideas, or later when you realize that those intuitive, downloads were true, or that you got some kind of like, synchronicity or sign that they were aligned or quote unquote correct. Kind of remember, like, pay attention. Where was I? What was I doing? How did I feel? Because they do, they may show up and talk to you in similar ways, but your body's reaction to them is what I notice feel really feel really different. Do you kind of agree with that, or do you experience it in a different way, Kristen?
No, I agree with that. I think that it is really important to figure out where it's happening because, yeah, I mean, I guess for a gut feeling, it could feel, I mean, depending on how it shows up for you, maybe it feels nauseous. I don't know, but it's not usually like that kind of gut feeling. I mean, everyone kind of, I think most people know what that sort of feels like. But yeah, for me, anxiety is more mental. I don't feel it too much physically. I'll, you know, I do feel some tension, but in terms of to distinguish it from intuition, it's totally different. And I hate to say like you just know, but it really is individual to everyone's body. But typically, yeah, for me as well, it's a different type of feeling physically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's a total learning process, and I think that's where people can get intimidated to start working with it. But it really, it really is actually a great invitation to just like be more present in your body and just like notice what's coming up. Because, for me in my practice, and I'm sure we'll get into this in some future episode, but for me, it's like that was one of the first things that I really did to like understand my intuition, was like understanding physically how anxiety felt and how this other thing felt, like even at the beginning, I don't even know that I was super comfortable calling it intuition, but I was like, well, that's not anxiety. Like, that's not making me like really feel out of control. That's trying to tell me something. And then later in the day, there was like, some other information that proved whatever that feeling was accurate. So, what's the difference? It's kind of if you allow it to be like an interesting self development, or like self getting to know yourself journey, then it can be fun. The first few times you start working with your intuition, it can be like, I think that people are really intimidated, and they think if at first glance they don't know how their body picks up intuition, then it can feel like, oh, I don't know, I'm a bad beginner, so I can speak to this from experience, where it's like the first time I meditated, I was like, well, that did nothing, so forget it. I think if you just allow it to be like a journey and you're building a relationship, then you'll pick up on all sorts of things. And again, you're priming your system to be ready to pick up that information.
Yeah, and you're building your trust, and I mean it's a process to build your trust, but another way you could probably distinguish anxiety from intuition is that you can think critically about intuition when something's coming through, whereas when you're feeling really anxious and you're future tripping and you're just in a spiral, it's very hard to pull yourself out of that and think critically about the situation and ways you can alleviate that anxiety. It's really hard to do that. So I think in terms of intuition, if there's a feeling you can't shake, If you can actually think about it and where it's coming from, I mean, that's probably a sign, depending on how anxiety shows up for you. That could be a sign that it's more intuition if you're able to actually think about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. Um, I'm curious. I know you know more about this than I do, about the different ways that intuition also can show up for us because, we'll get into how it shows up for each one of us, but I know that there may be people listening who have a different experience. So, can you kind of like walk us through those categories?
Yeah. So there's several. I've seen multiple, but I mean, there's like 4 or 5 main ones that most people have. So intuition, like we said, speaks to everyone differently. We're not all the same in that way. And usually there's a dominant way that you receive intuitive information, typically through the senses. And this is known as the clairs. Um, and like I said, there's several, but I'll share just a few, or like the main ones that I hear of most commonly. So the first one is clairvoyance. So that's clear seeing. So maybe intuition speaks to you visually, whether that's through an image that might cross your mind, sort of like a daydream, or for me personally, maybe it's through tarot. So tarot can be a language, or the imagery is a language that speaks to you. It gets your intuition sort of talking to you. Um, I'm sure Janine can speak more to that because she is a tarot reader professionally. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like a great mirror. And I know that as I've continued to work, when I started really thinking about myself as an intuitive person, I think that giving my brain the visual information of the tarot has also given it a way to communicate with me visually. Like, so if I'm like, picking up on a synchronicity that I'm like seeing something places, or like I'm getting a vision, whatever, of like going to water, I'm like, okay, there's something like emotional happening because that has to do with like the suit of cups, which are like more emotional and intuitive. And like, it's kind of like, what are those? I'm trying to think of like the name of it's like a key basically. Like it's been helpful to kind of because I never got just like total like out of the blue daydream visions. I'm kind of jealous of people who do actually. But now that I have this language where my intuition understands that I understand tarot, like occasionally those images like pop into mind and I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting. Like what is that?" Does that make sense? That
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
was like,
No, that's exactly what I meant.
okay, cool.
I I don't have like premonitions like you see on TV. Like I'm sure people have them, but that's not the way that clairvoyance works for me. It is like I the way I use tarot is more just to organize my thoughts in a way that I can see, and organize that all that information that's in my brain, things that haven't been thinking about, but maybe it helps me look at things from a different perspective, like just like you said, maybe one of those images, it's like the key, it pops something else up in your mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a way, I guess it speaks to both of us. Another one is clairaudience. So that's clear hearing. So you might hear an actual voice. So whether it's your own, maybe, I have a lot of chatter in my head. I don't know if that's very normal. But it's you could hear your own voice, or maybe it's another voice telling you something, or maybe different sounds, different types of music that you might hear, different tones that might give you certain feelings. Um, I haven't heard too much of that one, but I know it is fairly common. And then there's clairsentience. So that's a clear feeling. And this is related to empathy and being able to feel others' feelings and emotions, or that physical gut feeling, like we talked about, something that's more of like a visceral experience. And I think that's probably the most common way that people feel it. It's like their introduction into intuition. Um,
That's
yeah.
something that I found really helpful. I mean, especially there's so many amazing books about like, like the highly sensitive person. And if you're someone who feels very sensitive to other people's moods or like the feelings of a room or even like inanimate objects sometimes can like you can pick up energy.
Hmm.
I do feel like it's helpful sometimes when I'm having a feeling that to me maybe feels like quote unquote like out of the blue, or like I show up, I was in a good, I was in a good mood and then I like got to this restaurant and all of a sudden I'm in a bad mood, like in whatever way I'm defining that. I've found it really helpful to just simply ask the question, like, is this my feeling? And like, I don't know, I feel like that has been helpful to kind of check in and be like, is this one mine? We good? Or is this like somebody else's? Because like, if it is, totally fine. I can like take it in or just have my own relationship with it in this moment. But I think that if you're someone who feels like you have a lot of mood swings, or like your moods are quote unquote unpredictable, I think that sometimes there's a level of just like being really sensitive to emotions or feelings or energies that are around you. Obviously, there can be additional things at play there, but I've found that really helpful and actually like kind of empowering for someone who just thought I was like a drama queen for my whole life. And now I'm like, oh, wait, I know how to manage this.
Yeah, especially if you're really empathic or very sensitive, it is, I mean, energy is really, it can be palpable sometimes, especially if you like come in a room right after people have been fighting, but they're like
Mm.
acting like they're super happy. It's like,
Oh my God, there's like
you
nothing worse in this
yeah,
world.
you feel that tension, it's still there, and, maybe you go into that room and you're not sure what you're feeling. So that is a great time to ask yourself that question because, yeah, we can really pick up on stuff like that. And even like going back to kids being really intuitive, they pick up on energy,
Oh,
especially when
totally.
they're babies and, maybe they can pick up mother stress. They can, they pick up lots of different things. And that's part of it. That's why I think that's probably the the type of intuition that we're born with. I don't know, does I guess we can have these different types of intuition. It doesn't necessarily have to come in only one way, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think that even as you're kind of giving examples, I'm like, oh, I've never really thought about it that way. Like maybe that's like I relate to that. Like I relate to being able to use tarot, but I don't know that I ever considered myself someone who like utilizes clairvoyance. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um I think it can be just like it also, intuition is kind of adaptable and smart. And so to me, it's like the thing that you're reacting to or the thing you're noticing is like the avenue that's going to be the most, you know, vocal, if you want to say that. And so, but over time, as you're kind of strengthening that muscle, you might be like, oh, now all of a sudden I have this, like, now I straight up just like hear information
Mhm.
versus like being someone who's just like picking up a feeling. And maybe it's just your brain understanding how to categorize that feeling, or why it's happening. But it can be really interesting to just over time see how that, see how your intuition's communication with you changes.
Yeah, yeah. And then the last thing is clear cognizance. So this is clear knowing, and it's where you know things and you can't explain how. So I personally think this goes back to that library of experiences and information, but can also be more mystical than that. But sometimes if you just let go of the expectation of the way intuition will show up for you, because maybe you thought it was only one certain way. Maybe you thought there was going to be a voice talking to you. If you stop focusing on that one thing, it can be easier for the messages to come through because you're not only like hyper focused on one avenue. So,
Yeah.
yeah, Janine, I'd love for you to share how intuition shows up for you, and also, share your story of how you developed this connection to your intuition over time, and tell us all about you, Janine.
Oh my God, thank you. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that I tend to be like skeptical, which is also what leads to me constantly. If any of my clients, whether tarot or business wise, are listening, they know that I'm constantly like, oh my God, of course that happened. That's so cool. Like I'm in constant awe of like our ability to have this kind of information and, connect with people. Um, I think that for me, like I've always kind of associated the most with claircognizance because I, and I'm sure like my wheels are sort of turning after you just kind of talked through everything, but I really will just kind of like all of a sudden be like smacked with like an idea or a thought that feels like occasionally incredibly random or based on like really information that I am not processing actively or I'm not aware I'm processing at all. I had a really crazy experience like I won't get into the dirty details because it was like so college dramatic. But when I was in college, I had this experience where I ran into a friend who, we were like good friends, whatever, saw her, ran into her at the Northeastern Starbucks. Shout out to my alma mater. And it was a totally normal conversation. And immediately I just like knew that something had happened with someone else. And I will, like I said, it's like so dramatic, but it was so crazy that I was like, I can't, it was so strong. I couldn't resist following the urge to be like, hey, did this thing just happen to you? And it was literally like her mind was blown open. And so I just like, I don't know, I've had experiences where things have been more under the surface and then all of a sudden they come through and like this very clear like hey this happened and sometimes it does sound like my own voice and other times it's just like a total gut feeling. I also really respond to like synchronicities where like seeing noticing things over and over again like just piecing together things that feel like I would have normally just driven by them. um like for example, I left a candle lit at my house once and was driving into work and like kept seeing like my dad's a Boston firefighter, so I saw someone who had like a firefighter sticker and I like noticed it even though that's pretty common. And then I saw like somebody having like a trash fire like outside their house and then I like saw there were like all these things and then all of a sudden I was like, "Oh my God, I left a candle burning." And it was like I know that sounds like very very silly, but I kind of have
It's not though.
I know.
That's how it talks to you. It's like little pings sort of along the way to get you to look.
Totally. It's like this hilarious, I think because since I've opened up to this idea, I've always kept it like pretty light and breezy. Like I will, like saying, "Hey, is this like my feeling?" or like that thought wasn't mine or I've been very specific. I've been like, "Listen, I love that you love to talk to me. Like my intuition, you are great. You are like so special to me, but like can you not give me these like crazy ideas while I'm like driving? Like it's a little distracting." Like I really have had these like conversations with myself, which sounds a little nuts, but like I feel like I've tried to develop a playful relationship with my intuition, so that's how it shows up. And yeah, I mean, I think that for me the biggest thing has been finding space for it to be processed because I don't know if you feel the same way, Kristen, but for me like there's sometimes the information seems like kind of random or like I don't totally understand what the purpose of it is yet. And so rather than trying to hold all that information or all those synchronicities or all those signs or whatever they are in my head, for me, it's really been a practice of, you know, meditating, journaling daily ish, using tarot as a way to like reflect those thoughts and understand what they stand for, following the threads more just like with curiosity rather than being blindly trusting of like everything that I think is going to have this bigger meaning, or just being like, that's stupid. Like trust is definitely my biggest roadblock, as I've found that it is for a lot of other people. And so part of my, you know, commitment to my intuition is building that trust and showing and showing it that when it gives me information, I'm going to honor that by like, I have like a note in my phone that are just like intuitive pings. And sometimes
Oh
it's
my
like,
God, I do too.
"Oh, you do?"
I
Oh my
do.
God, I love us.
We were
Uh
meant to be.
true, two true type A witches. We're like, let me make a spreadsheet for that. But yeah, like because sometimes, I try to journal daily, like I said, and that's where I get to work with some of that information. But sometimes it's just like randomly this song came into my head today, and I've not thought about that song for literally years. And it was like this lyric over and over and over again. And so sometimes I just try to be like, I'm listening, I'm paying attention to you. I don't understand exactly what you want me to do with this, but I am going to show you that I'm taking it seriously. Look, I'm putting it in this place. So,
It kind of reinforces that the message that
yeah,
you're getting are real.
absolutely. So, for me, that's just like it's been a really an interesting and still a very ongoing process. I really loved this book called Tune In by Sonia. I think her last name's Chiquette. We can put it in the show notes, which is like a really nice and easy to digest like introduction to working with your intuition, which I also found helpful when I was starting out and just was like, okay, all these people are using this word and I know that there's information, but I don't exactly know how to use it. And so that's for me been the biggest thing is just kind of like creating the space and kind of the process for myself personally, because without that, it just felt very overwhelming. And that's when I was noticing that my anxiety was getting really intense because I wasn't really, I was just trying to hold too much. My brain was a sponge that needed to be wrung out, And so that's kind of I guess that kind of goes more into energetic hygiene. But for me, it's where all my best ideas have come from. It's where I feel like the most flow, that beautiful thing we're all searching for. And it also definitely reminds me, it's like my best caretaker too. It's how I've learned to have any self care at all. So such a gift. What about you?
I feel like I had this weird, well, not weird, I guess it's an unintentional journey to intuition,
Sure.
which is all about intention. So, I don't know, I feel like I've always been connected in some way, like definitely earthbound at first, which makes sense. I have 6 earth placements in my natal chart, 5 of which are Virgo. So
Oh my God.
listeners, you will learn I'm a total Virgo stereotype. But yeah, in high school was when I really started, feeling like a hippie, sitting in my bedroom, listening to Janis Joplin, burning incense. I was like I was very into like natural living. As I got into college, I even had a blog about like being green in the city, and I was doing yoga multiple times a week. And the yoga thing, that was really for helping quiet my mind and soothe my anxiety, because I was working in a really terrible job, and it was awful. So that was really helpful to for my mental health, but also, just quieting things, which is like a big part of connecting to your intuition, is like just getting yourself to shut up, you know?
100%.
So I don't know. I feel like I've always felt a connection to the earth and to myself in that way, but I didn't know at the time that that's what I was even doing. But I'd say it wasn't until after college and really starting to come into my authentic self versus, the college trying to fit into everywhere kind of self, that I really started exploring the different parts of that connection. And most of it was through cooking for myself. So um, it really intersects with my health trajectory as well, because I started learning all about food and nutrition and how different types of food work in the body, what certain foods are good for, how the body processes it. I just super nerded out over all that stuff, and I was so fascinated. And I got really intentional about my food and learning how it made my body feel. And again, I didn't know at the time, but I was practicing at least some principles of intuitive eating, and also some form of kitchen witchery. So, I felt a really big mental, physical, emotional difference in how I was feeling by being more intentional and present with my food. And, that pretty much changed my life. And, intuition is about being present with yourself as well. So, I started studying nutrition, and then that I started incorporating more mindfulness practices, and then outside of that, I was exploring the mystical side, which is where things started to integrate a little bit. So, one of the first ways I did that was sort of enabled by my best friend Crystal. Shout out to Crystal. She's probably listening. Uh,
Hi,
but
Crystal.
she, she gave me this orange deck of cards. These, like, I think it was Gypsy Witch fortune telling cards.
Mm,
Have you ever seen those?
I don't think so.
She was like, "Don't fuck around with these, they're real." And I'm like, "Okay." But
Amazing.
I started using them, and they're like tarot playing cards, like, they look like an actual deck of playing cards, but
Mm,
there's little messages on them.
okay.
So, I would pull cards every now and then, and, I liked feeling that there was some sort of, like, cosmic guidance, and that led me to buying my first actual tarot deck. Which, do you believe that someone else has to buy your first tarot deck?
Oh my
Because I hear
God,
that a lot.
no, I
I
do
don't
not.
either. Okay.
I think that is such an easy, like, okay, if the patriarchy didn't want women using tarot, what would they tell them? Oh, that somebody else has to buy it for you. I think that's like such a load.
And we're gonna make sure that you aren't making enough money, so you can't go buy it for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Like, don't at me. That is not true. I just can't. So I'm
Yeah,
glad you bought your own.
I definitely don't believe that. There's so many beautiful decks out there. Just buy what appeals to you. Um, but yeah, anyway, so I feel like the rest is sort of history from there. I pull cards for myself almost daily and sort of channel that way. And like you said, it's really hard to trust that at first, but it comes with practice. And, along the way, I also got into crystals because obviously the sparkly things are the funnest part of being a witch.
True.
Um, I do rituals for myself around the phases of the moon. I follow those energies with how I plan and or contextualize things in my life. I use the Many Moons Planner, which is the best thing in the world.
That
Yeah, so I'm attracted to a lot of different spiritual things, but I'm also very grounded in the way that I approach them. I think we're both pretty practical, and that's why we connect really well together. But the way it shows up for me, the more work I do on myself, it's sort of a mix of clairvoyance and claircognizance. So I'll think of
cool.
something before it happens. And then, in the moment with that thought, there's no importance to that thought. It's just something fleeting and trivial. And then it'll happen later. And I'll be like, oh my God, I thought of that exact thing happening.
Oh no, 100%. Like,
But it's like nothing important. And it's like, there's no reason for me in the moment to be like, oh, that's really important?
yeah, no, absolutely. And it's also like, it's the things, it's so funny. I feel like sometimes I get so mad at myself when I'm like, I didn't express that inane thought earlier, but now it came true and nobody's as excited as I am because
Yeah.
I didn't say it out loud. You know
Yeah, and
what I mean?
actually, I'll mention, since we're sharing just like very sort of like trivial things that come to mind, just in case anyone's listening to this and they're like, I have no idea if that's intuition or what, like, it can be this simple. So the one thing that sticks out in my mind is we were having a girls' weekend, and I have a couple friends who, like, they don't wear a lot of makeup. And if you guys have ever seen me, I like do the cat eye wings. I've been doing that since I was like 15, so I'm very good at it.
You are a pro.
And for some reason, I had in my head that my friend was going to ask me to do her eyeliner, and I just sort of pictured myself like just sweeping on the liquid liner on her. And she is not a person that like really wears any of that kind of stuff. She's very like natural beauty. Um, so there was like, it was just a fleeting thought. And then that night she asked me to do it, and I was
Oh
like,
my God.
what?
Yeah, and it's so hard because you're like, I didn't like I wouldn't have said like, "Oh, I bet you're going to ask me to do it later." But like, yes, exactly. You just like kind of have a feel you're picking up something. It's not like noticeable, but like there's something happening.
Yeah.
Oh,
So that's where
best
it kind of
feeling.
blends
So
into the
validating.
mystical. Yeah, that's where it kind of blends into the mystical, because I don't know where in my library of experiences that could have where that could have been pulled from. I just
Totally.
it was just so random and silly, and but it's still, I think in part that's my intuition's way of testing me to see if I'm acknowledging it and paying attention so that I can develop my trust muscle around it. So, like, maybe that
Totally.
if there is something important that I'm like, maybe not eyeliner related, although eyeliner is very important to me,
Very
I
important.
can I can, trust it more later when it's actually of some sort of importance.
No, totally. Like exactly. There's like these little I don't really believe like totally hear what you're saying and I know you don't mean it like this, but like I don't really believe in tests, but it's like you're not going to get this like big huge aha moment like your first thing because like
Mhm.
there's no way that you would trust like that you would trust it. You know, like it's very hard to build that muscle. So, even next time it's like, oh, maybe I'll communicate that or maybe I'll write it down somewhere so that I like kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm just big on proof, but I had something similar happen this weekend where my cousin Shauna, who's probably listening,
What's up,
was
Shauna?
hey Shauna, who actually was due to give birth, and I was away this past weekend with no cell phone service, and I was like, oh my God, like she's gonna have the baby. We're very, very close, and I was like, she's gonna have the baby. I'm not gonna have my phone. I'm not gonna know when it happens. And I went on a walk with my mother-in-law and we were just like walking around the lake and I saw this mother duckling with 10 babies and I was like, "Oh, Shauna had the baby." And I said it out loud, which thank God, because then when I got back to service, I literally have like the time of birth and it was like within 30 minutes.
Oh my God, that's
And I was
amazing.
like, yes. Oh my. Literally was like, oh, I can't wait to like tell Dean's mom that like I was right. Because I said it to her.
Such a good feeling.
Just like, I'm a witch.
I love when stuff like that happens in front of other people.
100%. So basically, you guys, like, that's what we want you to feel like, is to just feel so validated in your brilliance.
Like a super powerful, all knowing witch.
It's so satisfying. But I think that you, like, bring up such a good point, too, of like, there's like certain paths, even it sounds like in your kind of experience, where you were called to kind of follow that thread of curiosity and it like led you down these different paths. And again, maybe people want to call that coincidence. Maybe they just like look at it one particular way and that's fine. But I mean, I just like, I also just really enjoy the idea that things happen like intuitively and that we are, fulfilling some kind of purpose. Like I think that just makes my life feel really full and I think that that's kind of part of intuition as well. I don't know if you'd agree, but
Yeah, and if there are any naysayers, who cares? Because it's fun.
right, like it's fun. It's actually like taught me quite a lot and I mean, we'll get into all the ways that we work with it in like so many episodes in the future, but for now just to be able to kind of practice and um recognize that it doesn't always have to be this like super linear, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, way of thinking about the world. It can be a little bit more magical and a little bit more cyclical, and we can explore all the ways that it speaks to us without feeling like we're crazy. you know? Maybe that's it. Just don't feel crazy. You're just intuitive. There's our tagline.
Yeah. That is our new tagline.
Yeah. I guess to close out and hopefully this has been helpful. I mean, if anyone has stories about their own intuitive moments or even little things like our eyeliner and our duckling stories, like I want to hear them. I love that kind of stuff. And just, maybe if you even can reframe those moments in your own life to seeing them as intuitive pings rather than just coincidences, like I'd be curious to know if they start to happen more often because you're kind of honoring
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Keep a note in your phone like we do.
Yes, it's the best.
So, we have a list of 5 ways to start working with your intuition today because we like to give you quick, actionable things. So, just to help you incorporate some of the practices that we recommend, they're very simple things that don't take, like, you don't have to like cross off hours of your schedule for this. So, you can check those out in the show notes for this episode in the link below. And we'd love for you to download that and let us know how it works out for you. And feel free to tag us on Instagram at It's Just a Phase Pod. Janine, any last words of wisdom before we cut this off? I know we've been going a long time.
I mean,
I just love talking to you.
I just love talking to you. So glad we have this space. I don't know that I really have any last words of wisdom, just like y'all are intuitive. So, like, it's your It's not a use it or lose it situation by any means, but it's like, why not just like have a little fun and dive in? And I'm really excited to hear how the practices that we're sharing kind of work out for you. And if there's anything we can do or answer, reach out. That's the beauty of this little space that we're creating.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here with us today. If you loved our first couple episodes and want to support us, we'd love for you to leave us a review in iTunes. This lets us know you're enjoying the show and it helps other amazing listeners like you find our show too. You can keep up with us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. All the links are in the show notes. We're most active on Instagram at It's Just a Phase Pod. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email us at itsjustaphasepod@gmail.com. We'll see you next week.
Bye.